participants. First of all, I would like to thank Torrent for this academic initiative. Last year, when this COVID had initiated, we thought that we'll start this session, and last year we had many sessions on this academy. So this time again we had this Torrent's academic initiative. When the exams are approaching, we thought that the classroom teaching may be hampered in many places, and we thought we'll continue this medical education via this webinar series. To brief this series, we'll have this program every week on a Wednesday or a Thursday, some day of the week, and we will continue over it next 2 to 3 months on various exam related topics like the multivalvular heart disease, acyanotic heart disease, cyanotic heart disease, other clinical aspects, the hemodynamic sessions, the ECG related sessions, chest x-rays, and the recent updates in cardiology. So to start the inaugural session of this webinar series, we have with us Dr. Mukund Prabhu, a dual fellow in electrophysiology, and he is currently working as an associate professor and an electrophysiologist in Kasturba Medical College, Manipal. So we welcome you, Dr. Mukund. Sir has enriched experience in both the clinical research and academic part, and he takes keen interest in the teaching of the students. So I would once again like to welcome Dr. Mukund Prabhu.
Thank you, Sudhakar. I think we'll straight away start. We're getting late. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You can start, sir. Yeah.
The topic today is ECGs in congenital heart disease. I've done the same talk last year, and this talk is somewhat modified version of the same with a couple of cases added more. So scope will be introduction, ECG and the situs, how to use the waves for the analysis and how to draw the meaning from them, clinical classifications of congenital heart disease, case scenario based studies of ECGs. And throughout the presentation, I have included slides on quick tips. And the quizzes probably will not go into the quiz. What we can expect from congenital heart disease? As all of us know, ECG is an insensitive tool for diagnosis of congenital heart disease, except arrhythmias. A hemodynamically significant structural heart disease may exist with insignificant or minimal ECG changes, but yet analyzing ECG in this setting can provide valuable insight in understanding hemodynamics as well as nature of underlying heart disease. We should not interpret the ECG as standalone. We should always be viewing ECG in the light of clinical examination, history, and findings. A word of caution before venturing into ECGs. In neonates, right ventricular hypertrophy is the rule, and RV dominance may take up to 2 years or sometimes more to regress. As a first step, while analyzing the ECG, after history and examination, the sinus P-wave axis should be focused on to confirm the situs. Generally, this correlates with visceral situs. So if a normal sinus P, that is one that is upright in lead 2, as well as negative in AVR, is called sinus P. That correlates with situs solitus, visceral situs solitus. So that's called visceroatrial concordance. Whereas situs inversus is characterized by a P wave that is mirror image of the normal, that is positive in AVR and negative in lead 1 and 2. After that, cardiac position in thorax should be looked into because our further interpretation depends on the ECG is levocardic or not. For this, the precordial R wave progression correlates well with the position of cardiac mass in the thorax. In levocardia, there is usually R wave progression as we go from V1 to V6. And the transition happens generally in mid-precordial leads, V3 or V4. In dextrocardia, the right-sided precordial leads, that is V1R, that is the same as normal V1, up to V6R, show the R wave progression. And the usual leads shows actually R wave to regress as we go from V1 to V6. However, in mesocardia, the best voltages are seen in the mid-sternal or mid-precordial leads. And as you go either to the left or to the right, R waves regress. But coexisting chamber hypertrophy and lesions also determine the effect of R wave. But roughly, R wave progression correlates with cardiac position of the cardiac mass. Next thing to do is to look ventricular inversion is there or not. That is septal Q waves seen in lateral leads in normal situs. V5 and V6 will reflect small Q waves, and the absence of the septal Q waves, despite your impression of levocardia, so maybe a subtle sign of ventricular inversion. This is an example of situs solitus and dextrocardia. As you can see in this ECG, The P-wave axis, P-wave is positive will lead to a negative in AVR. So it correlates to the normal situs or visceroatrial concordance. And as you go from V1 to V6, instead of R waves growing, they are actually regressing. And in the inset, you can see the V3R and V4R, which are having a taller R than V1. That means R wave is growing as you go towards the right side. So this is an example of situs solidus with a cardiac mass alone shifted to the right side of the thorax. And usually it's associated with some form of congenital heart disease. P-wave axis, positive will lead to a negative in AVR, confirming a situs solidus. And R wave regression, V1 to V6, you are getting lesser and lesser R wave magnitude. This was the same patient's X-ray, which confirms situs. And this is for us to guess. This is a left-sided ECG. P-wave shows positive will lead to negative in AVR, whereas as you go from V1 to V6, though there are R waves, R wave magnitude is coming down. The next step should be right-sided ECG. Again, the frontal leads are the same, and right-sided leads as well show R wave regression. So best R waves are seen in V1, V2 towards the sternum, and as you go either sides, R waves regressing. So probably it's mesocardia. The echo was, of course, reported as dextrocardia. Our X-ray shows probably the cardiac must be more or less mesocardia. It should not be confused with dextro position, in which ECG interpretation is very difficult. And now coming to heterotaxy, the right atrial isomerism and the left atrial isomerism. Right atrial isomerism is hard to pick up because you have two SA nodes, and you can expect two constant P-wave morphologies. One of them will be sinus and other will be mirror image. One of them usually dominates, but over a period of time, you may happen to see two different morphologies. Whereas left atrial isomerism, SA node being absent because there is no right atrium, you will encounter with an escape rhythm either from the atrium or from the junction. So abnormal P-wave morphology or a junctional rhythm should be the clue towards left atrial isomerism. Like in this ECG, where you get biphasic lead, biphasic P-wave will lead to and negative in AVL and probably isoelectric in AVR. That P-wave morphology, otherwise you call it ectopic atrial rhythm, but also consider possibility of a left atrial isomerism and associated situs annulus. Apart from situs, you have to look for chamber enlargement, right atrial, left atrial, or biatrial enlargement in the P-wave. And in the PR interval, you have to look for PR prolongation or higher degrees of AV blocks. Congenital heart disease that are known to be associated with prolonged PR or AV blocks include corrected transposition, double outlet right ventricle, some forms of single ventricle, AV canal defect, and the Epstein's anomaly. Whereas short PR is seen in pre-excitation, classically associated with Epstein's, also in tricuspid atresia. QRS complex is the next thing to analyze. And for a congenital heart disease perspective, the frontal QRS loop is very important. It is classified either as counterclockwise or clockwise loop. Counterclockwise loop means one and AVL will show initial Q waves. However small they may be, they are relevant because that defines the counterclockwise loop. Whereas clockwise loop will show initial Q in the inferior leads, 2, 3, and AVF. Apart from this, which forces are dominant is the next question. RV forces as reflected by the R wave in V1 or V3R or V4R, or the S wave in lateral leads, that is V5 and V6. Similarly, LV forces manifest as S wave in right precordial leads like V1 and V3R, V4R, and R wave in lateral leads, V5 and V6. Sometimes we may see both ventricular forces are dominant. We call it Kac-Schwarzschild phenomenon. This means that both ventricles are well developed or perhaps dilated. Another abnormality rarely seen is the stereotypical QRS of the single ventricle, where V1 to V6, all leads show the similar QRS pattern, not the magnitude, but only the pattern. When you have a counterclockwise loop, you should be happy because you have a very limited number of differential diagnoses. They include inlet VSD, endocardial cushion defect, tricuspid atresia, DORV, and the single ventricle. So based on the clinical history findings and hemodynamics, you have to choose from this small list. Other clues from QRS are RV enlargement. You have to check whether it's a volume overload. It manifests as RBB and right axis deviation versus a pressure overload, which manifests as a monophasic R or a R dash, and strain pattern, deep inversions in right precordial leads. Similarly, if you have LV enlargement, you have to classify it into pressure overload, which is the classical LV strain, T inversion without prominence of Q wave, versus LV diastolic overload, where you have Q waves in the lateral leads and probably upright T waves. And subtle clues may be available even from the T waves, like transposition of great arteries, both DTJ as well as LTJ, may have upright T in all precordial leads, V1 to V6. And especially in DTJ, the right-sided T wave may be taller than the left-sided T wave. Usually, we don't look into T waves for this, but it's a very common finding in transposition of great arteries. And finally, interpretation should be always done in the context of physiology. So physiologically, we know we can classify them as left to right shunts, right to left shunt. Among that, cyanosis with reduced pulmonary blood flow, cyanosis with increased pulmonary blood flow, or the Eisenmenger physiology. Apart from these, obstructive lesions, either left-sided or right-sided, and pulmonary venous hypertension or heart failure physiology, and miscellaneous things like Epstein's and corrected TGA should be especially considered in the list because they may not have a classical clinical finding. A host of or varied range of presentation is possible, so the index of suspicion should be high. Among cyanotic heart diseases, we have to, from the history and finding, classify them into reduced pulmonary blood flow. Among that, it may be either RV dominance, which is the common clinical scenario, as we call it TOF and TOF physiologies. Also, critical PS with ASD. Similarly, LV dominance is seen in tricuspid atresia, VSTPS, and pulmonary atresia with intact IVs when the RV is small. We'll come into that a bit later. Then we have cyanotic heart disease with increased pulmonary blood flow. RV dominance is the common thing, causes being TGA, single ventricle, common atrium, or the TAPVC. Whereas LV dominance is seen when there is tricuspid atresia with unrestricted pulmonary blood flow, also in single ventricle. Biventricular dominance is less common and seen in truncus arteriosus and single ventricle. And Eisenmenger physiology is classically a clinical diagnosis. ECG can be used to find out what would have been the underlying lesion. So now we will walk into cases. The case 1, clinical scenario is 10-month-old boy, asymptomatic, evaluated for a lower sternal border murmur. No cyanosis. I'm not sure we can use the term NYJ. Some people use Ross classification as well. X-ray showed mild cardiomegaly and normal pulmonary blood flow. This is the ECG for you to interpret. ECG shows classical right atrial enlargement, pointed, peaked, P waves in lead 2, and PR interval that is full. Coming to QRS, it's a clockwise loop. 2-3 waves are showing Q waves, and more importantly, QRS is splintered. You can see not QRS in V2, V3, and to some extent V4. The right atrial enlargement and splintering of QRS is a combination, very classical, of Epstein's anomaly. And this kid indeed had Epstein's anomaly. The findings can be very varied. It may be cyanotic or acyanotic based on whether there is a ASD or not. The severity of wall displacement and atrialized RV contributes to the notching of or splintering of the QRS, which may be very mild to very severe. I'll show you other ECGs of Epstein's anomaly. Here again, there is no atrial enlargement. PR interval is perfectly normal, but we have prominent fragmentation of QRS in right precordial leads. In this ECG is a bit more severe form of Epstein's anomaly compared to the previous ECG. Severity of Epstein's anomaly increases, so do the QRS changes, and depending on intensity of PR, you may get changes in the P wave as well. This is another Epstein's anomaly, even more severe. You can see classical right atrial enlargement, not in lead 2, but in V1 P wave, and very peaked. PR interval is again full, and QRS complex shows fragmentation in inferior leads. And this 19-year-old lady had severe form of Epstein's anomaly. Again, right atrial enlargement, PR interval full, fragmented QRS in multiple leads, and QR pattern in V1, which is also seen in AVR. And this boy actually died at the age of 11 due to recurrent AVRT with syncopes. And he had a severe form of Epstein's anomaly. You can see all the classical findings: Himalayan P waves, PR prolongation, splintering of QRS with very wide terminal QRS in the right side precordial leads, and AVR and lead V1 mimicking each other. That happens when you have such a large cavity, atrialized RV and RA. Both V1 and AVR face into that cavity, and both being unipolar have similar reflection of the QRS. So quick tips in efficiency ECG is right atrial enlargement, Himalayan P waves, so-called the PR prolongation, but can be short when there is pre-excitation. RBB with normal or rightward axis. Actually, the absence of RBB in Epstein's should prompt you to think about pre-excitation. Usually, the pathway is right-sided. And splintered QRS correlates with size of atrialized right atrium. The initial Q in V1, which may extend up to V4, and similar morphology of V1 and APR. But remember, all the findings may not be there in every ECG, just like what we saw now. These are the X-rays of the same patients, which I show you the ECG, left being more mild and right being more severe. As severity increases, you can see the pulmonary leukemia as well. I'll not go into details of X-ray in this session. Coming to the case scenario 2, this is cyanosis with increased pulmonary blood flow, not a very common situation. 20-month patient with heart failure and systolic murmur with mild cyanosis. X-ray, obviously, increased pulmonary blood flow is expected, and cardiomegaly. What does this ECG shows? Strikingly, apart from situs solitus because of P wave axis, the counterclockwise loop should ring a bell because it's not a common finding in congenital heart disease, especially with cyanosis. To have negative Q waves, initial Q waves in 1 and ABL, and axis is normal or slightly inclined leftward, but within the normal range. We have 1 ABL as well as lead 2 showing positive QRS. What do the precordial leads show? So in a 20 months, you can see that V1 is totally negative and V6 is totally positive, just like an adult precordial progression. And all of the leads reflect predominant LV forces. There's no much R wave in V1, neither there is any S wave in V6. So counterclockwise loop, normal to leftward axis, LV dominance in a 2-year with cyanosis should prompt us to think of a tricuspid atresia as first diagnosis. Arrow shows lack of RV forces. This patient had tricuspid atresia with non-restrictive VSD and no PS. So subsequently PA banding was done. You can also see that LV forces are dominant with initial Q waves, suggesting a well-filled left ventricle. And this is the X-ray immediate post-op showing pulmonary plethora. Sorry, I couldn't get a pre-op X-ray. Going to the next case, it's of a 7-month with heart failure with systolic murmur, again cyanosis, X-ray showing plethora. You have situs solitus, right atrial enlargement as reflected by P in lead 2. PR is normal, classically counterclockwise loop, negative for Q waves in 1 and AVL, very good voltages and axis is shifted leftward. As expected, precordial leads show LV dominance, but this time we have sizable RV as well compared to the previous case. We have R wave in V1, we have S wave in V6, but dominant ventricle is indeed left ventricle, which is not very classical in this age. And given the background of cyanosis, increased pulmonary blood flow, counterclockwise loop, left acceleration, and LV dominance, again diagnosis should be tricuspid atresia. You can see the X-ray of the same patient, plethora, cardiomegaly. But this time there was TTGA associated with tricuspid atresia. And usually when you have TGA in tricuspid atresia, you expect the VST to be non-restrictive, though you can have any combination. More commonly, you will see non-restrictive VST, and that caused the prominence of RV. RV is relatively better developed, and you have good pulmonary blood flow, so you have biventricular forces being represented, but dominant one again is LV. That's how we use ECG in interpretation of congenital heart disease hemodynamics. Going to the 4th case, a 2-month cyanotic baby, no heart failure, deeply cyanosed. So at very young age, deep cyanosis means very less pulmonary blood flow. They would usually won't develop heart failure, rather they can develop swell. There is a soft systolic murmur. X-ray showed decreased pulmonary blood flow. So this is cyanosis with decreased pulmonary blood flow physiology. In that light, we have to interpret this ECG. Again, situs is solidus, P and P are near normal. P may reflect left atrial enlargement rather than right atrial enlargement. If at all you want to err on side of some enlargement. Of course, it's a borderline. Counterclockwise loop should ring the bell. So counterclockwise loop, so we have to see LV or RV, whichever is dominant. We'll go to the precordial leads. As you can see here, dominant force is still LV. V6 shows very good R, but this time RV is also not that bad, probably. But you take V3R and V4R, again S wave is larger. So at 2 months, this is a very abnormal ECG, and probably I will err on the side of LV dominance. This is the X-ray. This kid had tricuspid atresia and pulmonary atresia. That means hyperplastic right heart syndrome and ductus dependent pulmonary circulation. Normally related great vessels. I'm going 2 slides back. Please don't get confused. This is an important ECG because so far we have seen only tricuspid atresia. This time we have pulmonary atresia as well. So here the frontal QRS loop still is counterclockwise. If you compare with pulmonary atresia, which you'll see subsequently in the presentation, pulmonary atresia cases have a clockwise loop. So if you are clinically having a continuous murmur with cyanosis, commonest differential will be pulmonary atresia. In that patient, if you see a counterclockwise loop in the ECG, always think of coexisting tricuspid atresia, that is hypoplastic right heart syndrome. So the ECG gives a valuable clue here, just a subtle finding of counterclockwise loop in a patient with continuous murmur and cyanosis will change your diagnosis from pure pulmonary atresia to probably tricuspid atresia along with pulmonary atresia, HRHS. Tips for tricuspid atresia: without transposition, RA is usually enlarged, LVH and left axis deviation are the hallmark. Whereas if there is TGA, you expect better pulmonary blood flow, can have good LV forces and normal axis. Normal axis is due to better RV forces, the axis is pulled downwards. And in 90% cases, VSD is non-restrictive when you have a TGA. So RV is usually well developed. It's a classification of tricuspid atresia with transposition. X-ray I'm skipping. One slide on cyanosis with increased pulmonary blood flow. DTGA, which is a common thing in infancy with this combination, we expect RVH and right axis deviation, early presentation and severe cyanosis because of unfavorable streaming and poor mixing. And TAPVC, we expect RVH and RAD, right axis deviation in ECG, but being a pre-tricuspid shunt, you get mild presentation and RBBB is possible in ECG. DORV without PS will be counterclockwise loop and RVH. A wide spectrum of ECG changes are possible, but the counterclockwise loop is the key here. Truncus arteriosus usually will have biventricular dominance in ECG, and tricuspid atresia, whatever the combination is, counterclockwise loop and dominant LV forces. When there is no PS pulmonary stenosis, you expect left ventricular hypertrophy. And single ventricle with PS, though not very common, classical finding is neurotypical QRS. Again, counterclockwise loop is possible. URV and single ventricle, based on the anatomical changes, a wide spectrum of ECG changes are possible. Move to the next group, predominantly left to right shunts. The case 5, middle-aged lady, 50s, exertional palpitations and dyspnea. Auscultation revealed continuous murmur and prominent diastolic component pulmonary area. Findings were classical of PDA, though the natural history was not very classical. Still shunting left to right because of continuous murmur. And this is the ECG, which shows subtle left atrial enlargement, classical left ventricular diastolic or volume overload, deep Q waves, upright T waves, and voltage criteria meeting LVH. So this ECG is possible with many diseases like mitral regurgitation, aortic regurgitation. So always interpret this in the setting of clinical findings. So continuous murmur along with this ECG should prompt the diagnosis of PDA. This was very odd because she is 50 plus, still shunting left to right. So the X-ray. This case is a 16-month boy with recurrent respiratory infections and mid-systolic murmur in the upper sternal border. Any recurrent LRTI should prompt you to diagnose of left to right shunt. And based on finding, you know what are things to be considered. And this ECG is the same patient. It shows situs solitus. PR interval is subtly prolonged or full. We have notched QRS in lead 3. And RBBP, right bundle match block, usually correlates with right ventricular volume overload. And loop is clockwise. So this ECG fits in well with ostium secundum ASD. So clockwise loop, PR interval may be full, right atrium may be enlarged subtly, and right bundle branch block, and the so-called crochet sign, notching of the inferior lead QRS. The X-ray of the same patient showing ASD, ostium second. 58-year-old male, again history of frequent respiratory infection in childhood, exertional palpitation and fatigue, again mid-systolic murmur, normal saturation. This is the ECG. Compared to the previous patient, ECG is somewhat similar, but differences are, again, right bundle branch block is there, PR is nearly normal, but QRS loop is counterclockwise. AVL as well as lead 1 are showing subtle Q waves in the initial, best seen in AVL. And QRS axis is left deviated leftward. So any patient with counterclockwise loop and right bundle branch block, the setting of left to right shunt by history and examination, our differentials should include, of course, an ASD, but within the ASD, ostium primum ASD. Other differentials possible are AV canal defect, which may be partial or total. But usually, when you have a severe MR or a VSD, your left ventricular hypertrophy also will come into picture. So here we don't find any LVH properly. Only the RV diastolic overload is there, along with counterclockwise loop. Probably we are dealing with ostium primum ASD. Same patient's X-ray. Going to the 8th case, 6-year-old patient with heart failure, history of recurrent respiratory infection since infancy, and pansystolic murmur. Again, probably we are dealing with a straightforward case of VSD. X-ray shows cardiomegaly and plethora. Let's see what the ECG has to show. ECG is showing subtle right atrial enlargement, pointed P waves, though not very tall, and classically counterclockwise loop. AVL shows good Q waves and axis is leftward. Lead V1 is showing a monophasic R, probably not RSR dash, but monophasic R, whereas V6 shows again Q with tall R wave and upright T wave. We have biventricular forces, LV as well as RV forces, counterclockwise loop, and probably right atrial enlargement. In the setting and then the presentation, probably we are dealing with left to right shunt and AV canal defect, inlet VSD. So we have biventricular forces. It can be either a VSD developing PAH or AV canal defect where you have ASD as well as VSD, or sometimes due to mitral regurgitation. PAH probably is hyperkinetic because there is no RV strain one, and you have still evidence of LV diastolic overload. Some learning points regarding to left to right shunt physiology. Pre-tricuspid shunts like ASD reflected as RV volume overload and presents late. Post-tricuspid shunts like VSD endocardial cushion defects have coexisting LV volume overload, and AV canal defect especially has counterclockwise loop, presents earlier, and PD and AP window reflects as pure LV volume overload. A passing comment here, many of the cases with DORV with no pulmonary stenosis may mimic VSD by clinical presentation. Those should be RV dominance unless the VSD is restrictive, and PS will be mild in such cases. PH would not have been developed. You will think that it's a VSD, but once you check the saturation, it will be low, like 90, 92. There may be no visible cyanosis, but there may be desaturation. So whenever you have pansystolic murmur, you think it's a VSD, but the saturation is subtly low. Think of DORV. ECG clue will be counterclockwise clue. And RV dominance, of course. Some ECG tips in left to right shunt setting. Ostium secundum ASD. Classical things are RBB, right axis deviation, crotchet sign, and familial ASD will have PR prolongation. Ostium primum ASD, again RBB, but counterclockwise loop and left axis deviation is possible. LV forces can coexist if there is MR as or VSD. Sinus venous ASD. It's very hard to pick from ECG, though the classical teaching is that P wave axis changes. It's a very rare finding in clinical practice. If it is there, it suggests a sinus venous ASD. AV canal defect, hallmark will be counterclockwise loop with left axis deviation. Biventricular forces, especially if the VSD is large or MR is significant. VSD, classical finding is parsagil phenomenon. That's again by V forces, and RBV can also be seen. When there is inlet extension of the VSD, you expect the loop to be counterclockwise. PDA purely reflects as left-sided chamber enlargement, LVH of volume overload type. Case 9 is an illustration of Eisenmenger physiology. Again, Eisenmenger physiology is a historical and clinical diagnosis, not an ECG diagnosis. This 19-month child has heart failure in infancy, which has now improved. So heart failure subsequently improving should be a clue that shunt is coming down and pulmonary hypertension is being developing, or there will be pulmonary or pulmonary stenosis developing that reduce the shunt. It may not always be an ACE member, but other findings will be easily helping to differentiate between the two scenarios. X-ray shows cardiomegaly, borderline plethora, and prominent PH. This is the ECG. ECG shows situs solidus, right atrial enlargement, ER full, right bundle branch block, and as I marked here, counterclockwise loop. The counterclockwise loop, left to right shunt. First diagnosis will be AV canal defect or inlet VSD. Precordial loops, precordial leads shows RV dominance. Even in the V6, you have RS ratio less than 1. SVs are dominant, suggesting a right ventricular rather than left ventricular dominance. This is the X-ray, dilated PH. This it had Down syndrome, complete AV canal defect, severe PH, and less than 1.5 to 1 shunt. Regarding Eisenmenger physiology, it may be left to right shunt going to Eisenmenger. So initial heart failure subsequently improves. PH features dominate thereafter. Whereas right to left shunt going to Eisenmenger presents much earlier with cyanosis and heart failure. And heart failure improves, but cyanosis worsens. Going to the next case, it's a 21-day baby with heart failure, no murmur. X-ray showed obviously pulmonary venous hypertension is what to expect, and cardiomegaly. This one ECG is a diagnosis in itself without any history. So it shows sinus rhythm, but nothing else strikes more than ST elevation, especially in the lateral leads, 1 and AVL, and reciprocal changes in lead 3. Precordial leads also show lateral lead ST elevation, but seen in V5 and V6. At that age, first diagnosis and probably the only diagnosis will be L kappa. And severe LV dysfunction was also there in that patient. Underwent surgery, after which LV function improved. Another 7-year-old girl with heart failure, muffled heart sounds, soft systolic murmur, severe LV dysfunction. X-ray shows PVH. So this was the ECG, heart failure, evident as a sinus tachycardia, and Q waves, deep Q waves in lateral leads. I marked that in one lead AVL. Loss of LV forces. Again was an L kappa. L kappa should be considered in every young patient presenting as a DCM because many of the times LV function improves after surgery. ECG tips for L kappa are narrow but deep Q waves, LVH, and left axis deviation. These are the hallmark, but as we see in the second ECG there, LVH may not always be there. It also depends on duration. How long you have missed the diagnosis. This will enter the fallow physiology, which is a vast umbrella diagnosis and very exciting thing for exam going PG. So this 5-year, 6-month with no cyanosis, but saturation of 90%. History of heart failure in infancy and also had history of endocarditis. Finding wise, ejection systolic murmur in pulmonary area and soft P2. So soft P2 is a very important finding because many of the top physiology differentials, some of them have absent P2, like pulmonary atresia group. Others have soft P2. So if you are able to auscultate a P2, that means some antegrade flow or some sort of pulmonary wall development has happened. It's not atretic. All of us know the vast list of differential diagnosis of TOF physiology. It includes classical TOF, DRV VSTPS, DTGA VSTPS, LTGA VSTPS, pulmonary atresia VSTPS, pulmonary atresia with intact interventricular septum, AV canal defect and PS, and TOF with absent pulmonary wall. Some schools include that as well. So ECG can help very much in differentiating many of these disorders, though not all. Coming to this patient's ECG, we have situs solidus. P is nearly normal. We don't see any classical chamber enlargement. There is a RBBB, and there is a transition from V1 to V2. We have S waves getting seen in V2, but not in V1. That itself is a classical sign of TOF physiology. But more importantly, the loop is counterclockwise, which is very against the classical TOF. So when you hear TOF physiology with counterclockwise loop, always think something other than classical TOF with the same physiology. Also, you can see deep Q waves and LVH in V6. You expect a very well-developed left ventricle, well-filled left ventricle in such patients, and cyanosis will be mild because pulmonary blood flow will be adequate. Of course, after ruling out other causes like AR and MR, things like that. And counterclockwise loop with biventricular forces, RV as well as LV. So tricuspid atresia we don't consider. And Already we have told stock physiology. Our diagnosis should be TORV. It's a common differential diagnosis. It had DORV, PST, and mild PS. Mild PS is reflected in the V6 with deep Q waves and well-developed LV forces. As PS severity increases, your cyanosis deepen and LV force also come down. ER prolongation and counterclockwise loop points towards DORV rather than TOF. Counterclockwise loop with left axis deviation and LV forces, if seen in DORV, usually PS will be mild. As PS increases, your axis increasingly come towards the right. But still, the loop remains counterclockwise. That's important of picking a subtle small Q wave in one end area. Next case is a 7-month baby, cyanosis and possible spells. This is the ECG. See, situs auritus, pointed P waves, maybe subtle right atrial enlargement, but clockwise loop. And V1 is showing R dash. As you go to V2, you have a deep, large S waves. Ask me which is the dominant ventricle, probably RV is the dominant. Even in V6, you have very large S waves, which are more than R waves. You can see there's no much Q wave in V6. So this probably is classical with the tetralogy of Fallot. Especially that V1 to V2 transition, it's considered as a hallmark of TOF. Clockwise loop, right axis deviation, RV dominance. X-ray of the same kid. Going to the next 3-year-old boy with cyanosis and continuous murmur, no cardiomechanics, saturation is 80%. Cyanosis with continuous murmur, our first diagnosis will be pulmonary atresia. Differentials. This is the X-ray of the same patient, and this was the ECG. Again, situs auritus, probably right atrial enlargement, pointed P in lead 2, and V1 to V2, we have development of S wave, and as we go to V6, we don't find much LV forces. So it's all RV, and right side precordial leads reflect large RV forces. Your frontal axis is rightward. So everything fits well with TOF, except that it has a continuous murmur. So our differential diagnosis will be pulmonary atresia with VST. I had same with PDA dependent pulmonary circulation. This in ECG will be near normal PNPR, RV dominance, persistence beyond infancy, monophasic R in V1 that abruptly transits to RS pattern in V2. V6 is an important lead in patients with pulmonary atresia. If you see a Q with a large R, that means your QP, your pulmonary blood flow is good, the cyanosis will be mild, and LV will be well developed. Whereas if you see a small R and a big S, that means QP is low, pulmonary blood flow is low, underfilled LV, as we saw in this case, and cyanosis will be more intense. X-ray I'm skipping. Going to the next case, 1-year-old with cyanosis but no spells, again continuous murmur, no heart failure. X-ray shows decreased pulmonary blood flow. Again, we are dealing with some sort of pulmonary atresia. So what does the ECG reveal? Striking picture here is the RA enlargement, pointed peaked P wave, large tall P waves in lead 2, clockwise loop. You can see Q waves in 2 and 3, rightward frontal QRS axis. All so far, all contributing to pulmonary atresia diagnosis. Coming to V1, again we see right atrial enlargement along with that QR type of forces. Small S wave in, as we go to V2, and coming to V6, we have well-developed LV forces. When you have very well-developed LV forces in cases of pulmonary atresia, you should also think of intact interventricular septum. So pulmonary atresia with intact IVS, ECG depends on how big is the right ventricle. We'll discuss that after presenting this case as well. Again, cyanosis with continuous murmur, right atrial enlargement, clockwise loop, and I'll show you the precordial leads. V1 is showing the same QR pattern along with right atrial enlargement, but V6 is showing very large LV forces with Q waves. This was the X-ray. Beyond early neonatal period, ECG reflects the RV size in pulmonary atresia with intact IVS. A small RV will result in adult type of precordial progression, whereas a large RV causes QR in V1 and right atrial enlargement. So, compared to right VST pulmonary atresia and TOF, the RA enlargement was very striking in this case. Loop will always be clockwise, unless there is tricuspid atresia, hypoplastic right heart syndrome, as we saw in the earlier case, where the loop was counterclockwise. So this is another adult male post-BDG with pulmonary atresia and intact LVS. Hardly any RV forces can be seen here. There's no R in V1 and very subtle or minimal S in V6. It's all like normal adult precordial progression. This is the example of first we discussed the tricuspid atresia along with pulmonary atresia. We have counterclockwise frontal QRS loop. ECG has much to contribute when you have cyanosis and continuous murmur, because within the pulmonary atresia, which is a small group, you can get a valid insight into the hemodynamics. Going to the next case, a 9-year-old girl with exertional fatigue, no spells or heart failure, mild desaturation, to and fro murmur in the pulmonic area. The to and fro murmur is itself very classical of the diagnosis. We don't need any more investigation. Off with absent pulmonary wall. But interestingly, within the top physiology group, it has a unique ECG finding, as is shown here. V1 to V6, entire QRS is positive. This is not classical of other variants of TOF. So we have a to and fro murmur. I agree, no other thing is needed. But interestingly, we start not to have the ECG finding V1 to V6 monophasic R. Another example for the same. Just showing the precordial leads. Sorry for the poor quality, but it's evident that V1 to V6, all the leads are having R waves. You don't have the transition from V1 to V2. It's an example X-ray of the same patient. ECG in TOF with absent pulmonary wall. P waves will be peaked and tall, and dominant are in all the precordial leads. Other tips for TOF like physiology. They characteristically have cyanosis and spells. P2 will be absent or present, as I earlier discussed. If present, there is some antegrade pulmonary flow, whereas absent P2 usually correlates with atretic pulmonary wall. And pulmonary systolic murmur is inversely proportional to PS severity, unlike in valvular PS. Other tips for differential in TOF physiology. Classical TOF has soft P2 and ejection systolic murmur in the pulmonary area, whereas VST pulmonary atresia has cyanosis and continuous murmur with absent P2. Pulmonary atresia with intact septum, again continuous murmur, absent P2. DRV, VST, PS may have LV apex if VST is restrictive, otherwise it will be RV apex and RV dominance. P2 can be soft and audible. Corrected TJ, VST, PS, you may be able to palpate the L post-aortic pulsations beyond the pulmonary space. And DTJ VST PS hallmark is more prominent cyanosis due to unfavorable streaming. Single ventricle PS, again sometimes L post aorta may be palpable. TOF with absent pulmonary wall declare itself by its murmur, and TOF with AV canal defect you may pick up by MR murmur in the axilla. ECG wise, classical TOF as RBP, right axis deviation, clockwise loop, and abrupt transition to S wave in V1 to V2. VST pulmonary atresia, LV force is less prominent unless APCA or PDA is flowing well. Usually expect RBV and right axis deviation. Whereas in pulmonary atresia and intact IVS, you may see adult type of precordial pattern with no RV forces unless RV is dilated. If RV is dilated, you will see QR in V1 and pointed P waves. RVB RAD may not be seen, especially if RV is small. All you may see is normal axis and LV dominance. TOF with absent pulmonary wall, again peaked P waves, V1 to V6, dominant positive component of QRS. Tricuspid atresia, VST, PS suggest the ECG by counterclockwise loop and LV forces, and sometimes right atrial enlargement. TOF with AV canal defect, again counterclockwise loop, and corrected TJ, VST, PS may declare itself by ventricular inversion. We'll discuss that later. Clinically, L post aorta may be palpable. This example of TOF with AV canal defect. So you can see the counterclockwise loop. Next case is a 39-year-old lady. Invited to dyspnea, long-standing, upper sternal border, systolic murmur. Nothing much contributory clinically. X-ray shows mild cardiomegaly, normal pulmonary blood flow. This is very interesting here because it is situs solitus. U is near normal, but PR is wrong. As we have enumerated earlier, when you have PR prolongation in congenital heart disease, Our differential should include AV canal defect, corrected TGA, DORV, Epstein's. Epstein's usually will have PR prolongation due to large P wave. And when you look at the ventricular inversion signs, there is absence of septal Q waves. It's a subtle sign, but Q waves are seen in lead V1, very small, but it's there, and even in V3. And deep Q waves in lead, frontal lead 3. Take V3R and V4R, you can see the septal Q waves there, QR pattern. So this is the case of corrected TGA. We'll show you more examples. Four-year and 8-month boy, cyanosis since mid-infancy with systolic murmur, no heart failure. Again, we would have passed it off as toss, but now we know what all things to look. So absence of septal Q waves is striking. V6 doesn't have any Q wave. Even the T wave, if you see V1 to V6, everywhere it is positive. This is due to side-by-side relation of ventricles. In corrected TGA, ventricles tend to be side by side rather than a normal oblique orientation, and that is regarded as the mechanism for this upright T wave throughout V1 to V6. X-ray of the same patient. Echo confirm corrected TGA, VST, PS. Our usual top physiology differential. Next case is a 6-month baby, heart failure, failure to thrive as well, and systolic murmur and normal saturation. Again, this ECG is also classical. Apart from normal P wave, PR, deep Q waves in lead 3 is a sign of corrected TGA. Corrected TGA is not diagnosed by that sign. Diagnostic sign is absence of septal Q waves. Please note that it is not the presence of septal Q waves in right side precordial leads, but the absence of septal Q waves in the left side precordial leads is what diagnostic of corrected TGA. Septal Q waves may or may not be present in right side precordial leads, but it will always be absent in left side precordial leads. Corrected TGA ECG itself is a different topic. We can even take an entire session on that, but some summarized tips will be ECG reflects AV conduction issues, abnormal septal activation due to ventricular inversion, and also the effects of associated cardiac lesions. Long PR interval or higher degree of AV blocks are possible. Absence of Q in lateral leads is the more important sign than presence of septal Q in right sided leads. Positive T in all precordial leads, as you enumerate. This X-ray, we'll skip this. 13-year-old, next is 13-year-old girl with hemoptysis, detected to have a hole in the heart during infancy. On examination, saturation is 80%, near a long systolic murmur in the left sternal border. I'll just skipping the ECG without discussing further because this is a rare ECG. It shows stereotypical QRS in precordial leads. All the leads from V1 to V6 are showing the RS pattern. Only the magnitude of the S wave or R wave differ. Everything is same. In single ventricle, you don't have a septum, so that you don't have any transition. So everything will look into the same ventricular mass. That is, you have a single ventricle, and you're looking at the same mass. So you don't have a precordial transition that results in a stereotypical precordial pattern. Other findings like counterclockwise loop may not be there in all variants, but if it is there, always have to include single ventricle also in your differential diagnosis. In this case, it is counterclockwise loop with left ventricle, left axis deviation. One of the rare findings of single ventricle. You don't expect a stereotypical ECG very often in the ECG. With that, I have come to end. Yeah. I hope I have stopped in time, Sudhakar.
Sir, you have any ECGs for a quiz? If anybody can volunteer, we can.
Actually, not including today's this thing. I didn't expect it to finish this early.
Oh, okay.
Instead, I can.
I can answer we have another session. We have another interactive session maybe after our full clinical that thing where we can have an interactive session with the students, sir.
Yeah.
Just a few doubts. If in a brief, can we discuss the clockwise, counterclockwise loop? What does it actually mean? What does it mean? Yes, sir.
Actually, if someone wants to really know it, they have to learn vector cardiogram because that's an extrapolation from the vector cardiography. So a vector of the Frank system, more commonly used vector cardiography lead system. So how the initial QRS gets activated is what we call counterclockwise versus clockwise. So in a three-dimensional plane, as you see from the foot end of the patient, if the activation goes in the counterclockwise fashion in your vector cardiogram, the scalar equivalent will be the lateral leads, 1 and AVL. Because it's counterclockwise, it goes away from left to right. So they will show initial Q waves. Whereas it's a clockwise, the same thing will be positive in 1 AVL, and instead you will see Q waves in 2, 3 AVF. There are other patterns also like figure of eight activation and all. It's more and more confusing. But what you translate from vector to scalar is only the clockwise and counterclockwise. For example, you can't guess figure of eight activation and all from the surface ECG. But you apply it only in the setting of congenital heart disease and perhaps left anterior versus left posterior hemiblocks. Left anterior hemiblocks mimic the counterclockwise loop, whereas left posterior hemiblock reflects causes a clockwise loop. Another thing that can get confused is the clockwise versus counterclockwise rotation in precordial leads. That is a sign of RV versus LV hypertrophy. That again is not related to this at all. That's purely a scalar ECG concept, not a vector ECG concept. If you have a transition, usually we expect between V3 and V4, that if it goes further right, like V5 or V6, you call it clockwise. Whereas it gets earlier, like V2 or V1, you call it counterclockwise. That should not be confused with the frontal clockwise versus counterclockwise loops. So we have counterclockwise loop versus clockwise loop, which is an extension of vector cardiogram, an attempt to grasp the same meaning in the 12-lead ECG, scalar ECG, versus a precordial clockwise versus counterclockwise rotation, which is totally different, which reflects RV versus LV hypertrophy alone, not much used clinically nowadays. And even the frontal loops are used only in the setting of congenital heart disease for a very few disorders as I listed.
So if you have a cyanotic top physiology, sir, with counterclockwise loop, what will be our first top in the priority?
Counterclockwise loop with cyanosis, usually we need to consider only three: tricuspid atresia, single ventricle, and more.
DORV.
DORV and top with AV canal. That AV canal, the inlet VST is what correlates with the counterclockwise loop. Earlier studies have showed there's nothing to do with conduction system anomalies, and why it happens is not satisfactorily explained. But what we know is any missing inlet septal region correlates with this counterclockwise loop. So in the diagnosed setting of cyanosis, because you told only cyanosis, I will also consider AV canal defect Eisenmenger. That's why I brought it in. So DORV, VST, and left to right hand going to Eisenmenger, like inlet VST, AV canal defects, that also need to be considered apart from single ventricle.
Okay, sir.
And LV versus RV forces is another thing that will be used along with this loop to get a better limited differential diagnosis. For example, DORV is unusual to have LV dominance unless the VST is restricted.
Right.
RV dominance is the rule in DORV, whereas tricuspid atresia is LV dominance.
Right, sir. So how do you diagnose a dextrocardia with situs solitus bar situs inversus?
Easy thing is don't rely on the ECG. But for academic thing, P-wave axis correlates with visceral situs, visceroatrial concordance. Right. Usually visceroatrial discordance is extremely rare. So whenever you have a situs, normal sinus P-wave, you can expect the liver to be on the right and stomach to be on the left.
Right.
And after that, nobody takes right-sided leads unless you ask for routine leads not available. But if you note that the standard ECG shows R-wave regression, of course, clinical typical impulse is more important. Then you suspect that situs, cardiac mass is not to the left. Then it may be either mesocardia or dextrocardia. You take the full right-sided leads. We are progressing as you go to the right, you make a diagnosis of dextrocardia. Whereas if they're regressing to either sides, probably you're dealing with mesocardia. It's a meticulous way of analyzing the ECG, and nobody does it. I'm just including it here for understanding sake. And when you have a complex situs, better not to use the ECG for finer diagnosis. This all works well when you have a situs soltus levocardia.
I have another question: how to determine the axis if all the 6 limb leads are near isoelectric?
It's not possible, and then it's called indeterminate axis. It should not be confused with northwest axis. Northwest axis just mean AVL as well as lead 3 are negative. So you just you know that it's in the northwest quadrant. Whereas if you have RS complexes of near equal size in all leads, then it's not possible to calculate axis. Then it's called indeterminate axis.
Right, sir. I have a few questions, like if you can set it, like for the exam going, how do you tell that a ECG is a D loop or a L loop?
That is term itself is not used for ECG.
Right.
If you are asking about ventricular inversion, then in a situs saltus levocardia, you look for the septal Q waves. If you have septal Q waves in lateral leads, for a situs solitus dextrocardia, situs saltus levocardia, it is D loop.
Hello?
It's the normal loop. But catch here is the Q waves in the lateral leads or any lead is also a function of pressure overload or the volume overload. So that also may mask your findings. But in clinical examination, you don't have significant pressure overload or volume overload type of lesion. Then perhaps you can think of ventricular inversion just based on ECG. That's why echo is more sensitive for corrected TG than ECG. But absence of septal Q wave is the consistent finding, and deep Q waves in lead 3 than in any other leads. That combination of QC and L post aortic pulsations being palpable. These three things at the end of clinical examination reasonably correlates with the corrected TG.
Okay.
Or ventricular inversion to be specific.
We have a question, sir. In absence of situs solitus levocardia, is it possible to comment on ventricular relationship?
In the absence of situs levocardia, the combination may be situs inversus dextrocardia. There you can by taking an inverted ECG. But when you have disparity between situs solitus and cardiac mass, like situs inversus levocardia or situs solitus dextrocardia, then it becomes really difficult. Better not to attempt. It may be possible. You need extreme understanding. I'm not good at it. I just leave it at that point.
Right, sir. So suppose if in exam you have an ECG of a cyanotic congenital heart disease with AV blocks, what are the first few differentials we have to think of?
AV block is classically seen in corrected TGA. That's the common thing. 2% per year is the incidence as you grow up into adulthood. Up to 30% corrected TGA beyond the 45 years of age will have AV block. Beyond corrected TGA, AV canal defects are known to cause PR prolongation, sometimes may progress to AV block. Left isomerism is very well known to be associated with duplication of AV node and sometimes AV blocks, but I didn't mention that in my list. DORV can have PR prolongation, but higher degrees of AV block are not very common. Epstein's anomaly, another situation where PR prolongation or sometimes AV block also may be seen. Single ventricle is another situation. It just mimics corrected TGA loop-wise, so that can also have AV blocks. But all of them usually cause first degree or mild form of AV block. For it, complete congenital heart block is commonest with corrected transposition.
Right, sir. So somebody wants to know if we can infer antegrade pulmonary blood flow through the ECG.
Only surrogate marker of pulmonary blood flow in ECG is LV diastolic overload. So it just says whether you have good pulmonary blood flow or not. It doesn't correlate to the antegrade pulmonary blood flow is there or not. Even if it's through MAPCA or PDA, you may have good LV forces. Or you can guess from ECGs whether RV is well developed or not, whether you have good RV forces or not, whether you have good LV forces or not. Beyond that, you cannot guess. It doesn't matter whether your LV is getting filled through the antegrade pulmonary blood flow, through a MAPCA, through a BDG, through a BT shunt, or a PDA. It all will reflect good LV forces with diastolic overload, or no underfilled LV with no diastolic forces. You can't guess antegrade pulmonary blood flow specifically using ECG.
Right. So, if we have an pre-excitation type, a patient has a WPWF with a cyanotic congenital heart disease, is there any differentials we have to think of in that case, sir?
Epstein's anomaly is the most classical disease associated with pre-excitation, and that extends to corrected TGA with epsinoid malformation of the left-sided tricuspid valve. These are the two settings commonly, but classically Epstein's anomaly. If I remember correctly, maybe 20-30% of Epstein's may have axillary pathways, and it's a sanctuary of arrhythmias actually. Maybe multiple axillary pathway, it may be single axillary pathway, it may be a combination of axillary pathway and a Mannheim pathway. So you can have all sorts of tachycardia, including duodromic tachycardias. and that's a dictum that you have Ebstein's patient, you don't see any RBBB, then think of axillary pathway. Apart from Ebstein's and corrected TGA with epsteinoid malformation, other diseases where you can see pre-excitation is tricuspid atresia and single ventricle. The classical teaching is that the pathway will be in the same side of atretic wall. For example, tricuspid atresia, you expect pathway to be right-sided. It's not hard and fast, but commonly it is so. It's the atretic wall where you have to map for the pathway.
Right, sir. Somebody has wants to know what is the cause of most basic question we have, sudden transition between V1 and V2 in a case of TOF.
The speculated thing is that RVOT, absence of that RVOT anatomy. That's the hypothesis. Nobody knows for sure, but
so it's
sorry, I can't help you further there because that's the only thing we know.
Right, sir.
Subinfundibular VSD, that missing myocardium there, that straddles the V1 and V2 straddles over it. That's why they behave differently.
Right, sir. Sir, in the most common differential of a TOF, classical TOF is a DRV VSD PS in a cyanotic. So what will be the most common ECG differentials, like to differentiate between these two on a ECG?
If you want to bet on one thing, that will be counterclockwise loop. That's the most consistent thing that is different between DRV VSD PS versus TOF. Other clues are again notched QRS in mid-precordial leads, V3R, V4R. I have not read it in any books, but I've heard it from my teachers. That suggests a DORV. Yet another clue is a prolonged PR interval. That also suggests a DORV. Leftward axis, which is unusual in TOF, if it is there, suggests a DORV, but that itself is not very common in DORV. LV force is very dominant. That also can reflect in DORV if VSD is restrictive. TOF usually you don't get a restrictive VSD. DORV also it is rare. But you ask me to tell one finding, I will go for counterclockwise loop.
Yes, sir. Two waves in VCs, how do they estimate pulmonary blood flow? It is the same continuation of the question what was asked.
Q wave in V6, if you are attributing it to diastolic overload, if it is associated with LVH, upright T waves, near normal ST, and prominent Q waves, then it just means it may not be pulmonary blood flow at all. It can even be AR or MR. ECG doesn't reflect, you can't commit that it's pulmonary blood flow. But in a cyanosis with continuous heart murmur, where you don't have any other sources to fill the LV, you are sure it's not MR, you are sure it's not AR, then you attribute it to pulmonary blood flow. It should be very clear. ECG in any patient, diastolic overload need not reflect pulmonary blood flow. It can be any of other causes of diastolic overload. Can be MR, can be AR, can be left to right shunt, or can be due to very good pulmonary blood flow in the setting of cyanotic heart disease. ECG just says that LV diastolic volume overload is there. Meaning that it is due to pulmonary blood flow is given to it by us in the light of clinical examination and history. So don't take the wrong message that Q waves and diastolic forces in all patients reflect good pulmonary blood flow. It's not like that. It just reflects LV diastolic volume overload. In the correct setting, it can be used as a marker of QP or pulmonary blood flow, as I was shown in the examples. That's an inference drawing. It's not the ECG finding pointing to pulmonary blood flow.
Can I add to? I think we have unmuted somebody if they want to ask anything. Yeah. So I have two more quick questions. Can I find them?
Yeah, sure.
So if you have an Eisenmenger physiology, you have an exam case. Will ECG be helpful to tell you the diagnosis? Is it a pre-tricuspid or a post-tricuspid?
If you have RBBB, persistent RBB, a very dilated RBB, that usually correlates to the AST. If you have a counterclockwise loop, usually by the time they develop Eisenmenger, the diastolic RV will go away and you will get systolic type of overload, RV enlargement, rightward axis. Second thing is if you have a counterclockwise loop with Eisenmenger, again you will get RV dominance only. But counterclockwise loop should prompt the diagnosis of AV canal defect, followed by inlet VST and ostium primum AST. It's not very rare to have, it's very rare to have Eisenmenger in isolated ostium primum AST. but that comes down the list. But AV canal defect is notorious to cause asymmetric early because of its association with Down syndrome as well. And large inlet VSC also can cause asymmetric. And by the time asymmetric happens, RV forces tend to dominate in the ECG from Karshaw hill, which are seeing in the earlier age. As the shunt reduces, LV forces also regress. Whereas in PDA, you may still continue to have some sort of LV forces or LVH, but along with RH. So it's most important, ECG most useful to differentiate between the AV canal defect and downstream primum ACU group rather than anything else. Right atrial enlargement usually happens more commonly in ASD.
Right, sir. So this were the which we had. Yes, sir. So I think we will conclude here.
Last year we couldn't answer a single question. I remember. I'm happy that
yeah, we had that
we could have some time to.
First webinar we had many technically.
Yeah. So I'm happy that we could answer some questions at least this time. Yeah. And I thank you, Swakar, as well as other organizers for this opportunity.
Yes, sir.
We conclude here.
Yeah, so I would like to thank Dr. Mukund Prabhu for giving us an elaborate session on this ECG approach to cyanotic congenital heart disease and answering each and every question in the end. So I would also like to tell you that we will have these sessions every week, and we would will forward you the invitation 3 to 4 days before. And this sessions will be especially helpful for the exam going and other residents, both DM, DNB, and even medicine residents. So with that, we will like to conclude this session. The recording of the session we will forward you once we are near all of our sessions. So thank you one and all. Rahul, anything?
Yes, that's it from our side. Thank you, Dr. Mukund, and thank you, Dr. Rao, for being there. And I'm sure this platform will be useful in the times to come. We will be always there. Torrent will always be there with this kind of academic initiatives. And we'll look forward to partner with you ahead also. Thank you and take care, sir.